Hello there. Welcome. We are about to begin on Stop the Virtual Meeting Madness. What you'll need to do is mute your phone, and if you have another phone in the background or an animal or something that might make noise, please put them on quiet as you can. One of our survey participants even said she had to hide in the closet during one of our last webinars. This is Stop the Virtual Meeting Madness. And I'm Linda Swindling. I'll be introducing my co-host, Randy Pennington. This is a very informal discussion. And the very first things we're going to do is look at the agenda. And the agenda is basically housekeeping, what's the purpose of this meeting, your rules of engagement or your ground rules. And then we're looking at, why do virtual meetings suck? Because sometimes they do. And what are your 6 ways to really make your virtual meeting better? And then the last one, we're really going to spend some time on questions and actions that you might want to take. Now, if you'll notice, at the bottom of your Zoom screen, at the bottom of that Zoom screen is a comment section. There's a questions and a comments. For the purpose of this webinar, this discussion, it's not a very formal webinar, so it's more like a discussion. Type in questions as you have them, because we'll be able to see them, we'll be able to keep all that up, and that way we won't miss anything you've got. Also, if you have a resource, this is more of a sharing and seeing different types of resources. If you have a resource you think would be appropriate to share, please do so. Give us a link, and at the end, what we'll do is we'll compile all those resources. We will send them out to you as well as the survey that we did. So as we go through the agenda, the very first thing I want to do is I want to introduce my co-host and co-partner in crime, and that's Randy Pennington. Hi, Randy.
Hello, how are you?
Great. So we're going through the housekeeping rules and purpose. And so some of you know some of my housekeeping rules. I'll run through a couple. One is, again, the muting the phones. Wave at us if you need us. Jill's watching, and try to always have a Jill. And so we've got Jill Tweed Scott who's watching in the background. I'm going to turn this over now to talk a little bit about the purpose, and then we'll talk about PAL, and we'll have Randy do that. So the purpose of this is, I actually was talking to some of my clients and some of my friends, and they were all saying, I'm just bogged down. I just cannot handle all the virtual meetings. It's just too much. To the extent that they were saying, I don't have time to go to the bathroom. These meetings are going over long, 2 hours, no break, and then it's extended in, and then off we go to the next one. So I threw that out as a question to see if anybody else in the universe was having it, or was it just the people I was speaking to. And I just put a question on Facebook, and bam, people started saying, yep, me too. This is the issue I'm having. I'm seeing it all over the place. And Randy got on and gave some really good advice on, how do you handle meetings? And then he said, Linda, let's just have a discussion. So that's how this came about. Again, we're going to go through housekeeping purpose, rules of engagement, and then why do meetings suck? And then 6 ways to make meetings better. And then finally, what actions and questions can we take? So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to bring it over to Randy. And Randy, can you tell us a little bit about PALS, about that philosophy of really making sure that you're on task when you're on any kind of meeting or in any kind of meeting?
Sure, Linda. This is the PALS approach to creating an agenda is one that I've been using for a number of years. And if you think about organizing your agenda, it really comes into 3 sections. The P stands for purpose, the A is the agenda, and the L is the link. So when I create a meeting agenda for clients, both virtual and in real life, I have a P, that's the purpose, and I have, at the end of this session, we will have accomplished this. Now, the real part of the purpose that becomes critically important is it's what you want to have accomplished at the end of the meeting. not what you're going to cover, but what you want to have accomplished. And that's really important if you're doing regular team meetings with people to keep it on track. This was what we want to have covered. The agenda just lays out everything that you're going to cover in the order that you're going to cover it. I'm often asked, do you use a time code? Some people do, and I would say use a time code if you have trouble, either you staying on track or someone else staying on track on your team, then time codes can work. The L stands for the length. It's when we're going to start, when we're going to stop. If there's a break in there, just say with breaks or lunch or whatever, if I'm doing this for a multi-day. But the PAL structure really helps focus the agenda, not on what you're going to do, but what you're going to have done at the end of the meeting.
So always looking for that objective. And you heard what Randy said is some of us have some people in our organizations that can talk. You know, we give them a microphone and they talk instead of the 2 minutes, 22 minutes, and the meeting's over basically by the time we start getting to the meat of it. So if that is your case in your team meetings, you just put a little timer beside it, and 2 minutes, you know, might be 7, but at least you've kept them to 7. So that's great. Now then, ground rules. Some of you have been through trainings that I've done or programs, or we've been working on a big leadership task. If it's anything other than a keynote, you're going to have been through some ground rules. I call mine rules of engagement. Randy, you call yours ground rules, right?
I call them ground rules.
Now, what's your favorite ground rule?
Well, my favorite is work hard, have fun.
Love that.
And that's one that I always make sure. But I mean, people have been in this enough. They know what the basic ground rules are. It's, you know, play nice in the sandbox, treat each other with respect, don't talk over, those types of things. So, you know, one of the other things that I've noticed though, and this may be something if you're thinking about in your corporate meeting room, you might even have ground rules or meeting rules of engagement on the wall somewhere. And
right.
That's great, but now you're working in a virtual environment because people now are home with COVID-19. And so it's probably a good idea just to pop up a slide. If you have ground rules from your office, just pop up a slide to make sure that everyone remembers them. That way you're bringing the office back into work.
Yeah, and you can customize what you do for ground rules. I always regret not having them. And let's say we're doing strategic planning about 1:00 p.m. We've started at 1 p.m. I'm regretting that we didn't come up with ground rules. So I'm going to give you a few that you may not have seen, that especially if you see that your meetings aren't tight. Here's just a few. One is in Robert's rules, you can say call for the question, which means let's get to the vote. I think everybody agrees, let's move on, right? When we do that, we've done a couple of things. One is something I learned from Tim Durkin, which is DISCO, and it's Sun Microsystems and Sun Microsystems merged with Oracle, and it's can you DISCO with it? Can you DISCO with it? And so, you know, what does that mean? Well, can you disagree, but go ahead and commit to taking the next steps? So they'll say, well, what do you know, well, yeah, I can DISCO with it. I don't think you're right, but I'll disagree, but I'm willing to commit. And why that's so important is, let's say that's not something that I'm a stakeholder in, or let's say it's something that we could go either way. I think a way is better. If they ask me, can you DISCO? And I say yes, then when we walk out of the room, if it's a meeting room, or hang up these cell phones or these Zoom meetings, everybody's on the same page. This is what we're doing. And you'll have people say, well, I thought you were going to argue for this. Then what do? You look at them and you say, we talked about a lot of things, including that. This is how we're proceeding. It's just like kids where you're trying to tear them apart. It doesn't work. DISCO will slow things down. Also, I'll do this. I'll say, okay, quick thumb pull. And they'll say, yeah, I don't care, whatever, just move on. Or no, absolutely not. Or yeah. And we'll say, well, can you DISCO? No. Okay, that's the person you have to talk to, or this may be something to be tabled. In a big meeting room, you can have a big parking lot. When you don't have a parking lot, one thing you can do is say, okay, who's going to be our parking lot, attendant today? And Jess, you're the parking lot attendant. Jess is going to take down all the different actions. And before we leave the meeting, we're going to make sure we know what it is. One last thing that I think will help you in these quick meetings, you've got to, especially some of you I know on this phone are techies, and you like to tell us how everything came about and all the history since the beginning of time. You don't have time on virtual meetings. You saw that we even shortened our virtual meeting now. Meetings need to be shorter if they're virtual. You should be able to pay attention, get on task. One other thing on that is you can say, okay, are we building a clock or are you telling me the time? And if it's a joke and everybody's like, yeah, I guess I am building a clock, or they'll say, no, there really is something important here, then you're not sitting through all the details of how they came to that decision. You just get into the decision. So one last thing on these ground rules, have people vote on them, have people submit. So if we had several hours of meetings, or we would be doing a team meeting and virtual meetings, we would come up with all of those ground rules, and then we would vote on them, and those would be our rules of engagement or our ground rules. Because that way you've got the commitment, and it's not me imposing it or somebody else, Bill, imposing his rules on us. We are all in agreement, and it becomes fun. It becomes funny. Last one on all of these ground rules. If you're conducting the meeting, and I know several of you are, you do not need to be the police enforcer of all the ground rules. You don't have to handle all of this. Your job is to delegate. So if you're one of the leaders, you're either a team lead or leading a project, what you say is, all right, who is going to be our parking lot attendant? Great. Who is going to make sure we record our actions? Terrific. Who is going to make sure we take an energizing break? We might call them the Energizer Bunny. Terrific. And then one last one, a lot of people are posting, it's just so boring, or it's too much oversharing, too much motivational. Have somebody be your motivational person, one motivational quote that means something to you as far as leadership or getting things done. And I say, okay, Betty, you are the leadership quote person for next week. Here's my leadership quote. I say it, this is what it means to me. In 1 minute or two, we can get into the meeting. Now, this is for team meetings that we're going on and on with. If it was a strategy meeting or a check-in meeting or something else, we would have different ground rules. All right. So in order to honor your time, yeah, Randy, go.
Before you jump on, you mentioned Robert's rules. By the way, if you're going to use Robert's rules as your ground rules, make sure everyone agrees on that. Because there are organizations that operate with Robert's rules, and there are organizations that operate with Bob's rules.
Right.
And the difference between Robert and Bob is the level of formality that you're willing to have with that following Robert's rules. So having led big boards over the years, one of the things that I learned is, for example, call the question. It generally means, okay, we're ready to move on, but formally it means we have to vote on whether or not to stop debate. And so that's where, again, somebody will go, well, that's Robert's rules. Well, maybe, but that's also Bob's rules. And so just make sure as part of your ground rules, if you're going to do that, that you have some agreement on what all that means, because otherwise you'll get off debating the wrong things.
Terrific. I think we move on to my favorite slide that Randy has ever prepared in my life that I've ever seen. And that is what, Randy? Where is it? Here, I have to share my screen, which you all know that I am the least. Anybody who knows me knows we are learning together. All right. So Randy, tell us about this slide, which hopefully says, does that say?
We're not there yet.
Oh, good. I love this. Just a second. There we go. Bam. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay.
And
hooray.
And if Linda, if you would pop on the little show the presentation at the
No,
bottom.
every time I go off, it takes it out again.
Yeah,
That's just something to learn.
That's one of the things that happens. By the way, one of the things we're going to talk about is unreliable technology. I'm going to come back to that one. But I mean, here's what I'm noticing. And by the way, I've been conducting a lot of virtual meetings, not just now, but in general. You know, I was on one 2 weeks before everybody went virtual, and I was like, man, this is terrible. And afterwards, everybody was like, yeah, this is terrible. And so, but now if you look at it, let's talk about what we're seeing. And by the way, at the end of this, I'm going to give you a chance to stop and ask questions along the way. But one of the things that's going on right now is increased distractions. Some of you might have heard a little dog barking in the background. That is Jackson the Wonder Dog. And that means that my wife has just come home. And so Jackson is alerting everybody in the neighborhood that that's going on. But here's what's going on today. People are worried. They have their dogs, they have their cats, they have their kids. They might be at the kitchen table, but their kids are on either side of them in the kitchen table, talking about or trying to work on schoolwork. They're looking at them in the camera and thinking, wow, I didn't realize the camera made me look this way. Or they're looking at all of you thinking, man, I think I would have worn something different. Or they're looking to go, I wonder what their house looks like. Is that Randy's real office or is that somebody else's? And I mean, so there's a lot of distractions that are going on right now. That makes it tough. People feel isolated from the group. And especially right now with people working virtually, people feel isolated because they use all of your virtual online meetings for the socialization they used to get in the break room in the hallways. And that means, by the way, that's exceedingly important. And so an option for that, it's not really part of this meeting, but it's an option for that is you hold separate meetings for that. In about an hour and a half or 2 hours after this session is over, I meet for my Friday afternoon Zoom happy hour. With my friends, and we have it scheduled. And you know, one of the pieces that we all talk about is who's drinking what bourbon today, and that's that distraction and that feeling isolation. You can deal with that in other ways. Unreliable technology. I have, by the way, the camera that I'm using is my second camera because for some reason the main camera that I wanted to use today wasn't connecting for some reason. So this is my second camera. About 3 minutes before I was supposed to go on, my mouse went out on my computer, which means I could get to nothing. Fortunately, I had a little backup USB computer. I mean, it's about that big, so it's a little hard. So, I mean, one of the things that you have to realize is unreliable technology can cause a problem. Lack of interaction, people don't get to talk, and then lack of attention. And this is especially true because if you've attended virtual meetings in the past when they were just teleconference, you could check your email, you could, do whatever you wanted to do and nobody would see you. But now with video conference, everyone can see you. And that's a challenge. I did a presentation, a virtual presentation about I think it was 2 days ago for about 80 people. And I loved what one of what the session moderator said. She said, because of attention, first off, I'm going to ask you please to focus on the session. The second is, this happened to be during lunchtime. She said, would you please turn off your camera and mute your phone or mute your mic because we don't want to see you eating. We don't want to hear you eating. And so again, that's a distraction that causes people to be disrupted and not pay attention. So, I mean, those are the things that I keep seeing, and I'd be curious now, Linda, if you want to take this off, I'd be curious right now, are there questions? Does this make sense? Are you seeing something different? Let's, by the way, Carolyn says, I was taught the POW method. Yes.
Good, and it works, doesn't it, Carolyn?
Yes, it does. It absolutely
works. So I think
works.
what we can do is, why don't we Why don't we put it in chat? What are you seeing? Let's just write in chat because I think that'll be easier. Or we can take it off too, off of mute. Jill, do you do that or do I?
Everyone can unmute themselves.
Oh, that's right. Unmute yourself.
Yeah.
So
If you
if
know
you
how to
have
do that, it's up on the button up on the top right where your picture is. It says mute or unmute. So everybody just unmute who would like to say something.
And by the way, that's the way we'll know that you want to talk. If we see you unmuted, we'll know that you want to speak, and then we'll say Michelle or Zan
like
or whoever. So
yeah, it looks
that's
like
a good way of
Elena or
managing it.
Elaine. Elaine wanted to say something. Yeah, Elaine.
Well, I know that you gave us the acronym of PAL. Purpose was the first. Could you give me the other two, please? Because I
Yes.
didn't jot them down. Thank you.
Yes, purpose, agenda, length.
Thank you.
You're quite welcome.
Yeah. Looks like Spencer's connected to audio. Spencer, did you have something? No? All right. And
I see Sherry's unmuted. Sherry, question, comment?
we'll come back to you, Sherry. All right. And anyone
Sherry,
else?
I don't think you have audio enabled somehow.
We
You can type it in the chat.
This is Michelle Lucia. I
Okay.
had learned yesterday in a webinar that you don't have to unmute, like I just unmuted, that you can just hit the your space tab, and that will then put you in and out of mute without having to unmute yourself. So you might
Oh,
want
that's
to try
pretty
that
cool.
too.
So we learned something. So tab space. The other, has everybody seen the Make Me Beautiful button on video? So if you go down to the video, to the caret of video, and you hit, so where it says stop video to the right of it, it says video settings. And so it says select a camera, whatever it is, and then video settings. And you can hit touch up my appearance. So here's me untouched up. Oh, and then here's me touched up. I don't know if you can tell, but we're pretending like you can. So why would you not want to put touch up my appearance? I do not know. All right. So anything else that would be helpful as far as technology? One thing that I've seen from the survey results are if you're communicating one way, so let's say we're communicating through chat or we're communicating however that is, and someone sends you a message on something else, they need to let you know. So 2 people told me they missed important meetings because somebody Snapchatted them or they sent them a text and said, hey, I want to meet with you afterwards. And they missed out on meeting with the CEO and one missed out on meeting with the VP because they didn't know. Okay, and Sherry says, I'm on the phone, the computer mic doesn't work. Sherry. Still not. Okay.
Sherry, I just sent you a message. Are you the 214 phone number? I can unmute you. Let's try it.
She's unmuting you because she's Jill.
And
All
she's saying, never mind.
Never mind. Okay.
Oh, never mind. Okay.
Anybody else? I think we get back into content if that sounds good for everybody. Thumbs up?
Good.
Okay, great. Randy, what's next?
Let's talk about some things that you can do because I'm mindful of the time and keeping it going. So Linda, if you would share the PowerPoint one more time.
Yeah,
let's
absolutely.
go through and talk about some things you can do to make your virtual meetings better. And hopefully you've picked up an idea or two along the way. And let me just stop and say, if you're doing webinars, you can take this and adapt it, but this really isn't focused on a viewer webinar. So let's see if we can, if you can advance that slide. All right, so we've covered the very first one, having followed the agenda. The second one is one of my favorites, and that's about being crisp. And part of being crisp is some of the following the ground rules that Linda and I have talked about. You can also make your meetings more crisp by the way you think about the agenda. So for example, if you're doing an agenda to deal with, a meeting to deal with reports, then you send the reports in advance and you keep the meeting crisp by saying, everyone gets 2 minutes, only 2 minutes to summarize the report. Then we have questions, and then we have anything that you need going forward, any decisions. So that structure and how you even think about the meeting itself and how the presentations are done. We don't use meetings to read reports to people. That's boring when it's face-to-face. It's even more boring now. You use the meeting to discuss issues, get feedback, and make decisions. So that means people have to think a little in advance, in that case, to send reports in it so that they can be read and then you can talk. One of the other things to keep things crisp, I'm not sure how many of you are doing morning meetings right now. I have a client of mine that we just talked, and they're actually doing 2 meetings a day. The first meeting in the morning is 15 minutes. It's only 15 minutes, and it's a quick check-in. And that structure of that meeting is this. 1, overview of any key metrics, decisions, things coming out of the organization that anybody needs to know. And if there's follow-up information, that's provided offline. But there's any key metrics. The second thing is everyone goes through what they're working on. I'm working on this. This is my project. This is what I'm working on. And they have 3 responses only at this point. Am I on track? Am I off track? Or am I off track and need help? On track is, boom, you keep going. You don't need to discuss it. You're on track. Off track, if they say, I'm off track, but I'm going to catch up because of this, you keep going. Off track, needing help, that goes then to the bottom of the list, the bottom of the agenda. And there's a really quick conversation that you need to have when somebody says, I'm off track and need help. It's, do I need help from another person? In which case you identify that and take it offline. Or do I need help from the group? In which case it goes to the end of the agenda for discussion. But that keeps everything going forward so that everyone gets through what they need at the end. Then anything between people you prioritize or they take offline. Anything that requires everyone, you do a quick priority. Do we need to do this one today? Can we do this one today? Do we need to have a special meeting? Or can this one be rolled over to tomorrow? But that keeps that meeting very, very crisp in the way.
Randy, we do it with arrows. So are you, how are you doing today? I'm up, on whatever the project, how I'm feeling, whatever, about the same, down, and then down with the star, I need some help. You can do it that way. So just something quick. Yeah.
Right.
So,
but the whole point is you want to get through everyone's first so that the very first person that has an agenda, you don't immediately go to problem solving and then take that time away.
Right. Or you can put your KPIs in the check-in. That's why we started
Absolutely.
5 minutes afterwards. That's usually when somebody has something go wrong with technology, is that first 5 minutes, right? So 5 minutes in, that gives them a chance to at least breathe or get technology going. And then we're going to stop 10 minutes before in order for you to take a break, do follow-ups, do anything that you need to do. And then if there was something really important and we agreed to go to the end of the hour, you've got that cushion, that buffer. Okay, sorry, utilize all the technology features.
Yeah, and that's, so if every program, whether it's Zoom or WebEx, they all have certain features. Most of them are all the same. Just make sure that you utilize them all. For example, like Michelle, your idea today about space and that takes you in and out. I mean, that's a beautiful thing. That's a technology feature. One that I hadn't thought of before and didn't think to look at before. So thank you for doing that. And understand everything that your technology will do and everything that your technology won't do. Because getting people familiar with the technology minimizes a lot of problems. Controlling random conversations. Basically, there's 2 ways to do this that I found that I've seen work. The first one is you don't go more than just a few minutes, maybe 10, 15 at the most, without stopping and having a check-in with the group. And that way, people can usually follow that okay. I would almost prefer it to be more like 5 or 6 minutes, but if you go 10, you're probably okay. I mean, you realize that, every 8 minutes or so is length of time between commercials on a sitcom. Yeah, we're usually kind of watching, we're willing to watch that.
Hey,
On
Randy,
the other hand,
Patty had a good question. How do we stop someone from hijacking a meeting?
there's two. That's a great question. By the way, that's a question even in live, Patty. And you stop them from hijacking the meeting, and it kind of goes back to being the producer and the choreographer. I will let them maybe kind of go over for a minute or two if the first time. But if you think about a TV show, if somebody's going to be on your favorite talk show, the producer knows what they're going to say. So if you have someone like that, you have that conversation, chances are you know them, you have that conversation with them right up front. The other way that you can do that is one that Linda mentioned in the ground rules. And that's like, you're not the time police. So just make it okay for everyone to go, wait a minute, is this being productive? To your point, are we building clocks or telling time? You know, and I've used building watches or telling time, same principle. And I've seen people say, wait a minute, I feel like I'm in watch building 101 right now.
Right.
And
you
that
always,
helps as well.
You can always use your parking lot. You can always say, wow, that sounds like that's a big issue. Let's put it on parking because we want to make sure we get through our agenda and then get to that. And then I want everyone to practice this very, very high sophisticated technical phrase. You ready? Time out. Time out. And you can just do that in screen and they'll say, what are you talking about? And you say, time out. We want to stop. We want to get back to it. I think Patty just raised her hand. Patty, let's get through these and then we'll hear from Patty. Okay, go ahead.
This is Patty.
Oh, there she is. Hi, Patty.
All right. So this hijacking situation, you know, just because we're in an online meeting, many times we are with high-level people in that meeting. So propriety is still very important, and it's a live meeting. And so there are occasions when the person that's hijacking, we can't stop them,
Right.
but they derail the entire meeting.
So that, Patty, is called keeping your job or keeping your client. And that's just a political thing. You have to say, okay, that's not what is really important, but I have no power. I'm going to lose face, or I'm going to lose my job, or I'm going to lose a client if I keep up with if I say something. And we all have those instances like that. That's just an intelligence test. Hopefully, though, if you're meeting a lot, you can toss it out like this. You can say, you know, I just sat through this webinar with these two speakers. I don't know if this would help, but, and you do it up front so that you have meeting rules, and that will help. So sometimes I use something I've heard or my clients do, and I say, hey, we just heard this, let's try it, even if it's to a superior, because everybody wants to get more done. And you can say, and you can even say, Randy and I will back you up. You say, and the speakers challenged us to, and then just let Randy and I know what it is that we said that we were challenging you to, but we'll be your backups.
Yeah, by the way, if you're going to do that, tell them I'm Joe Calloway. I mean,
yeah,
that's
just... right. I've got your back, Patty.
Yeah.
Okay. So,
but let me offer another idea, Patty, too. I think everything Linda said is right. There's a couple of things. One, if you're using Zoom, and I know other technologies have this too, there is a way that you can send a message to specific participants. If that person is more likely to respond to that, if it's a virtual situation, you can send that. I've seen people send texts to each other during those things. And here's the other part, is Linda's right. You live to fight another day, that not every hill is worth dying for, if so to speak. But if that happens once, there may be nothing you can do about it. Right. If it happens more than once, that means you didn't do what needed to be done after that first meeting. You know, I'll sit through one lousy meeting or maybe two lousy meetings to keep my job. But at some point, I'm going to go to somebody else and say, how do we get this? Is there a way for us to influence this to go differently? I mean, everybody's doing meeting after meeting after meeting. Let's not make it so that everyone is that bad. So that would be my other.
I'll give you one more hint, and then let's move to the next one. One is, if they are a big talker and they're speaking to think, how some of us talk, one thing you can do is tap them on the break, tap them in between calls, like Randy's saying, and say, hey, you feel so comfortable here. Would you do me a favor? Hang back and make sure you encourage other people and say, hey, Josh, hey, Elaine, hey, whoever it is, can you participate? Hey, Zan, hey, Heather, I haven't heard everything yet. So be the person that holds back and encourages others. A lot of times they'll do that for you. And that way everybody's encouraged. Okay, Randy, think of yourself as a producer and choreographer.
One of the things, and again, I think we all believe that people just walk in and have a meeting. I think a great meeting, a great business meeting of any kind, is choreographed and produced. You know what's going to happen. You know how it's going to happen. People you have a comfort level that people know what they're supposed to say and not supposed to say in the meeting. I think the more important the meeting, the more important it is to consider having a run through of that meeting. When I work with large public companies, one of the things that they talk about is when they're doing presentations to the board, they practice those meetings over and over and over and over again. And so it's because it's produced. And if you need to walk through it with someone that's not as equipped as you want them to, make sure that you do. Make sure that you know the questions to ask. If it's going to be a contentious issue, make sure that you know where that one needs to go on the agenda so that it doesn't derail everything else. It's thinking strategically about what you want your meeting to do and what you want the outcome to be. And you're not just a participant, you're not just the leader, you're someone who's helping the group reach a common desired result.
Right. And remember, you're leading it. If you are the leader, you're leading it, and they've given you permission to lead it. And if they're really hijacking, I've had that happen, Randy's had it happen. You go, wow, oh, we can't agree on this. You go, wow, that's never really come up before. If you could just sit there and some people are trying to hijack. I love this comment. Stephanie says, hey, Jack, feedback. I found a voice of influence in the room to leverage the relationship to encourage others' input. Absolutely. You just go to the person and say, hey, can you encourage everybody here to participate? Absolutely.
Let me offer
last one. Oh, go ahead.
By the way, let me offer one more thing about being a producer, and it's also keeping meetings from hijack. If you're not watching what's going on in the media right now, if you use Zoom technology and you're not watching what's going on with meetings being hijacked and Zoom bombed, you need to pay attention to that. It is an evolving story. It's something that I think we all have to worry about. I had a friend of mine the other day was doing a public webinar type meeting, and somebody bombed them and just unloaded on them with obscenities in the meeting. Fortunately, they had a Jill there to take care of that. But one of the things that's going on today that we wouldn't have been talking about 3 weeks ago is how meetings are being hijacked by people who aren't even supposed to be in the meeting. So make sure that you're aware of that. Make sure you go through the Zoom settings. There's some things out there in the media. We're not going to teach you how to do that now, but just make sure you look for that. Last one, be intentional with interaction. In a face-to-face meeting, you can open it up and let people talk. One of the things that you've seen us model here is some way to be intentional. For example, if you say, unmute your microphone, we'll call on you, that's being intentional about how you manage that interaction. Another way is to use the chat, to raise your hand. Asking yes or no questions. I know in Zoom and WebEx, both there are polling features. So you can set up a poll if you know that you want to have that as a question. But be very intentional, because otherwise you say, what do you all think? And one of three things happens. One is nobody says anything. The second is everybody says everything. Or the third is the person who talks first and loudest is the one whose idea gets resolved.
Right.
So, be
Absolutely.
very intentional about how you manage that interaction. And if you haven't heard from somebody, just like in a face-to-face meeting, call on them. It's really is a matter of understanding your group. If it's a group that works well together, if I've got 3 people in a meeting, I'll probably manage it different than if I have 12 people in a meeting.
Sure.
But be
And
very intentional about how to do that.
this isn't something new. A lot of you have been managing virtual teams. And what I've always called it is virtual bingo. We play virtual bingo. And I put everybody's picture up that I'm going to need to talk to on a team or on a department, and I'll just call people. And then what I'll say is, well, we just heard from so-and-so. Who would you like to hear from next? So, we just heard from Robert. Robert, who would you like to hear from next? And he'll say, oh, I want to hear from Nikki. So you never know who's going to be on next. And so you have to stay alert and engaged. There's lots of features. This is not a Zoom call. This is really kind of keep your meetings tight. But yeah, you could use whiteboard. You can use polling. You can do what we did before, which is a survey ahead of time so that we stay on track and that we send you information. And Sherry, that's how I would keep them engaged, is questions. And then I would make sure I delegated other people to help do the questions. Patty said one other thing. She had sent me a message separately before about practicing. You got to practice, because it's a different methodology. Randy and I jumped on the phone and talked through this, because these meetings are so important and they're so overwhelming that you're seeing so much. Now then, so that we stay and honor your time, we've got about 3 minutes.
May I offer one quick idea in 30 seconds?
Sure.
And that is, and this happens inside and face-to-face meetings. Why are we having this meeting? Because it's the weekly meeting. And why do we always have this meeting? Because it's the weekly meeting. One of the very first questions I'd like for you to ask yourself before you schedule a meeting is there another way to get this done without a meeting? I mean, I think that would help people's sanity more than anything, is if you said, we need to get this done. There's a different way of doing it. I'm going to do it without pulling everyone together. And so if you can come back to, can I get it done with a phone call, with an email, with a text, with just 2 of us meeting, whatever that might be, is there a way to get this done? And as you're doing your PAL agenda, if there's no concrete deliverable that moves you forward toward your vision or strategy or goal, then chances are you shouldn't have the meeting to begin with.
Yeah, and on that, is everybody that's invited the ones that will really make a difference? You may need to have those meetings beforehand. But the other thing is, this may be a chance if somebody from your team, somebody from your department, someone from your volunteer group needs to be on this, this is a perfect chance to delegate that to someone else and have them be your representative. Because a lot of these meetings, you're there for 2 minutes of report out and you're just sitting there for 55 minutes. But for someone new, they may need that. They may need the structure and to see what's going on so that later they'll have an appreciation. We got about a minute or 2 to wrap up. Does anybody have anything that we didn't address? You're welcome to take yourself off mute. Is there anybody that you really think, gosh, I should have asked this, or this would be so helpful? Okay. We could go on and on this topic. This is always my favorite. The only reason it's my favorite is because later it definitely changes culture. And if you will continue to have these meetings, even though you have to set it up, and that's probably the hardest part for a lot of you, you're action Jacksons, you like to get into action and get things done. Take the breath, set it up, help people learn, help people structure their meetings, because you're gonna play on that for years to come. Sometimes you'll have to go back and, if I was really, really trying to enforce this, what I would do, I would have a meeting at the very beginning, 5 minutes, and say, okay, what are our top 5 rules we're going to go through? And, Spencer, what's yours? Carolyn, what's yours? Carolyn, who do you want to hear from? Oh, Stephanie. Okay, Stephanie, what's yours? And you go through that just as a reminder. If you can do that when new people come in, they can do that too. So that just kind of sets your culture. It gives you a team. And yeah, and Mara says, thanks everybody for this opportunity to connect. Now let's all go wash our hands. You all, thank you so much for being with us. Randy, thanks for all that you did. We appreciate you a lot. We appreciate what you're doing in the environment, and we know everybody on here is a leader. I was looking through it. Best wishes to you as you go and negotiate these tough times.
Thank you all.
Thank you.